I want to say a big thank you to Derek Lewis, who came through for us big time last week. You can see in my thumbnail for last week's video, Derek is rocking the Plus EV t-shirt, and he certainly was a Plus EV bet last week as he came through for us at big underdog odds. So if you watched last week's video, hopefully you tailed the bet on Lewis and made some extra cash, and hopefully we can make a bit of extra cash this week on Max Holloway. We'll be getting into the reasons why I think Max Holloway is one of the best bets of this year in just a few moments time, but this is about the stage in the video where I talk about all the great success we had in the live betting group last week, and I play you a little clippy clip of us hitting a winner on live betting in last week's event in my live betting group. But unfortunately, I can't do that this week because I didn't make any money in my live betting group last week, which was very frustrating because it's not very often we don't do that, right? We make a profit on almost 70% of UFC events. I think the stat is down to 68 point something now. And as you can see from the profitability chart, we make a profit almost every week live betting on the UFC. But can't make a profit all the time, and unfortunately we only placed one live bet on last week's card, and it was a brutal loss. It was so brutal that I'm actually going to play you the clip of the kind of audio from my live betting group from last week so you can relive the pain with me, and you can see the pain and the disappointment in my face when the universe hands me an absolutely brutal loss. So I'm going to roll that clip now, and let me know in the comments below what you think about that big fat L that I took and the brutal look of disappointment in my face when we took the L. Let me know what you think. So in a purely stand-up fight, I do favour Thompson. Obviously Bonfin's got major power, could knock him out, but I would be surprised if Bonfin were able to outstrike Thompson. In terms of in terms of just win a decision in a stand-up fight. I would be surprised by that. The only way I could see it happen would be if Bonfin were to get like 2 knockdowns, right, in 2 different rounds. But actually outpointing and outscoring Thompson, I don't think that's very likely. So good first round from Bonfin. Definitely took the first round, but he was looking very uncomfortable on the outside. Was looking very uncomfortable. The odds are feeling quite wide here. The odds are feeling quite wide, boys. Boys, I bet half a unit, 0.5 units on Thompson at 4.5. There's a couple reasons for this bet. The first reason is Thompson did a pretty good job of defending himself in grappling positions there, and we know he's a cardio machine. On top of that, we have seen Bonfin fade in pretty much every fight that went the distance. He faded against Dalby, he faded against Ange Lusa, and we're already seeing Thompson pressure Bonfin on the outside. It's an exhausting situation to be in when you're on the outside and you're forced to react to what your opponent is doing, and Bonfin's not a natural counter striker. So Bonfin definitely won the first round, but if Bonfin starts to fade a little bit here, he likely won't have the energy to take Thompson down, and if he's trapped on the outside, it's going to be even harder for him to time his takedown entries. On top of that, if Thompson starts to let his hands go, attacking the body, I think it could be very difficult for Bonfin here. At the end of the day, 42-year-olds don't beat guys in their early 30s very often, but I was surprised that Thompson was as big of an underdog as he was when you saw how Bonfin was kind of trapped under pressure on the outside towards the end of round 1, because we know Thompson can go at a high pace for 3 rounds, no problem. We have seen Bonfin fade. And also on top of that, to Jay Powers' point earlier on in the night with a Nate Landwehr fight, Wonderboy's got the crowd behind him as well. So if any of these rounds turn out to be close, which the first wasn't to be fair, but if they did turn out to be close, you'd think Wonderboy would have a good chance of getting a nod from
the judges. Do have Thompson winning this round, just outpointing Bonfim, but obviously that can change quick. There's a long time left in the round. Beautiful entry there from Bonfim, but Thompson sprawls right out of it. Another entry there from Bonfim. Thompson gives his back up. Bonfim on the back again. If Thompson can defend this though, Bonfim will likely be pretty tired from this attempt, and then gives Thompson the opportunity to end the round strong. Odds are very wide here though, man. Thompson 5.5 is kind of crazy to me. He's winning this round in my opinion. Whoa, wow, Thompson wobbled him. Thompson wobbled him with a head kick. Wow. Thompson wobbled him. Thompson wobbled him. Wow, 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 wow. Thompson wobbled him with that head kick. Wow. So should be 1 round apiece heading into the third. And yeah, we hit the over as well. Nice one, LVL. I completely forgot about that, mate. So Thompson with a nasty cut to his left shin from those kicks that have been landing, but Thompson is a tough fucker. Guys, add another 0.5 units to Thompson. So the second 0.5 is 3.10 odds, or 3.0 odds. Come on, Wonder Boy. We've had a big weekend betting football, boys. Can we have a big weekend on the UFC as well? Come on, the boys. So, boys, that is the end of the fight. I have Wonder Boy winning this 29-28. That is the end of the fight, boys. I have Wonder Boy winning this 29-28. Come on, judges. I've got this 29-28 Wonder Boy. Let me know how you've got it, boys. Let me know. I've got it 29-28 Thompson. Obviously, it doesn't look great. You know, with Bonfim kind of wet blanketing him up against the cage late in the round. But Wonder Boy did good work with his striking before that. And so a bit of hugging up against the cage and some failed takedown attempts shouldn't neutralise Wonder Boy's striking. And Wonder Boy had the crowd on his side as well. So hopefully, boys, the judges get this right. I think the correct decision is 29-28 Wonder Boy. And we hit Wonder Boy at some nice juicy underdog odds. So hopefully the judges get this one right, because it would be the cherry on top of a very nice weekend for us. 4-0 on football this weekend, and if we could hit a nice big winner in UFC Live Betting as well, that would be great. That would be very, very, very nice. So the official odds, Crocs, 0.5 units at odds of 4.5, and then 0.5 units at odds of 3.0. If anyone doesn't think that's fair, let me know. But I think it was pretty easy to get in on Wonder Boy in those odds ranges. So hopefully the judges will agree with us, boys. Here we go. Here we go. It's going to be a split for someone. Come on. Do your job. Oh my god, that one hurts. I'm actually gutted. They went Bonfim, boys.
So there we go. I took that loss on Stephen Thompson 5 days ago, and I'm still pissed off over it. I still haven't quite got over it yet. With the crowd behind Thompson, with him being a legend of the sport, with him being 42 years old, with him performing so well, I didn't think the judges were going to get that one wrong. It was one of those bets, one of those losses where I was counting my profits before the decision was even read out. I was so confident the judges were going to score that fight correctly, and you could probably tell by my reaction when the decision was read out. I was absolutely crushed, to be honest with you. I was very disappointed. So last week's event was almost a very big profitable night for me, and even though I did still make a profit last weekend, you know, the Stephen Thompson loss definitely put a downer on things. But not to worry, this weekend UFC 318 gives us another great opportunity to make some cash, and as you can see from our profitability chart, we make a profit most weeks on the UFC. So if you watch every UFC event live, joining my live betting group is an absolute no-brainer. You will love it. Check out the link in the description below to head on over to my website where you can join us if you want to. You won't regret it. And I think you'll not only have a lot of fun, live betting the UFC with us, but you'll also learn a lot and make money at the same time. So it's a great service. A lot of people have got a lot of value from it over many, many years now. Been tracking my results on live betting for almost 10 years, so come join the team, you won't regret it. Okay, so now let's get into the reasons why I think Max Holloway is a great bet this weekend. So straight after UFC Fight Night Lewis versus Teixeira finished last week, I sent out a 2-unit bet on Max Holloway to win at average odds of about 1.83 minus 120. His odds have declined a decent amount now. In fact, his odds have declined quite a lot depending on what site you're looking at. But even at these odds, if you haven't bet Holloway yet, I still think there's a ton of value in his odds. And I actually think Max Holloway is one of the best value bets of the year. For reasons I'll do my best to describe in this video. So Max Holloway is 33 years old, 5'11" with a 69-inch reach. Dustin Poirier, 36 years old, 5'9" with a 73-inch reach. So both guys are the same height, but Poirier has a very nice 4-inch reach advantage, and Holloway is 3 years younger, which is pretty significant because, at 36 years old, 37 years old, in January, Poirier is getting very old for a lightweight, and he's also had close to 40 pro fights. I know Holloway has had a lot of fights as well, but close to 40 pro fights. 36 years old. Poirier has got a lot of miles on the clock. On top of that, he's been in a lot of wars. He's taken a lot of damage. He's been knocked out a bunch of times. Had a lot of injuries. So needless to say, Poirier is one of these guys that is most likely going to be declining from fight to fight because this is a young man's game. And, Father Time's undefeated. And I know Holloway's no spring chicken either, but he certainly hasn't had as many miles on the clock as Poirier, hasn't been knocked out as many times, hasn't taken as much damage, hasn't had the kind of injuries that Poirier has had. So, even though there's only a 3-year age gap between these two, Holloway, in my opinion, is the fresher, healthier fighter, which counts for a lot in a matchup such as this. So I've referenced couple times now that I think Max Holloway is one of the best bets of the year, and the reason why I feel Holloway is one of the best bets of the year is because Dustin Poirier has announced his retirement. You can see he is talking to this guy here, whoever it is, basically announcing his retirement live on air. I think this guy, Pat McAfee, is kind of like a big star in the United States. He's not over here in Europe. We don't really know who this guy is. But anyway, he went onto this show to announce his retirement. And this doesn't happen very often with like really high profile fighters. To my knowledge, in the last 15 years, it's only really happened like a handful of times with like really high profile fighters, maybe not even that many times. So it's very rare you get a situation where a guy in Poirier's position will announce his retirement so far in advance of a fight. Like you can see, this article was written on April 25th. Which is going to be almost 3 months before this fight actually takes place. So that's quite a unique situation. The way that this usually works is Poirier will take, a big fight like this against Holloway, and then if he loses, he will kind of say, I'm done, I'm retiring, that's it, I'm hanging my gloves up. That's how it usually goes. Sometimes fighters retire on a win, like in terms of, they win a fight and then they're like, I'm done, I'm retiring. But that's extremely rare. For the most part, we very rarely get happy endings in MMA, and most fighters, retire after a tough fight. So this is a really interesting situation because anecdotally, something that we talk about a lot in my community, many people in my community have been with me for years, and a trend that we've noticed over a really long time is as soon as fighters start to kind of mention retirement, soon as they even hint at the R word, it's like the biggest red flag that exists in combat sports or in betting on the UFC. Like, if you want any indicator to bet against a fighter, it's when they start talking about retirement. Like, there's no stronger indicator you could possibly want to bet against them. And there's another trend that exists within MMA, and that's when a fighter announces their retirement. So they're not just talking about potentially retiring or thinking about retiring or saying, oh, you know, I've only got another 2-3 fights left in me. When they actually come out and state that they're retiring, they almost always lose. And like I say, there's not a huge sample size for this, because most fighters don't announce their retirement. Most fighters just fight and then retire, right? It's quite rare you get situations where fighters will come out and state they're retiring, but when they do, they almost always lose. And it tends to be a situation where, you know, again, you don't really get fighters at the profile of Poirier doing this. It tends to be, you know, just your average fighter that'll mention it on Ariel Helwani's podcast, or will mention it on an Instagram post. You know, maybe they're fighting on the prelims and saying, you know, this weekend is my last hurrah or whatever. When they do that, they almost always lose. The percentage of time fighters win that do this is very, very small. This is just a trend that I've noticed having done this for so long. And so this is one of those situations where, before you even consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, the fact that most of us would perceive the way these two match up as being, you know, pretty close and competitive. You know, most of us would agree that, you know, both Poirier and Holloway are very high level strikers, and on the surface neither guy has got a huge advantage, right? So then when you consider Holloway has this big trend in his favour, which is Poirier saying he's retiring, and we know guys in Poirier's situation don't win very often when they declare their retirement. When you then look at the odds on Holloway, he becomes a very attractive bet, because if we take a look at the implied probability that we bet Holloway at, it was like 1.83 odds, right? So that gives him an implied probability of 55%, which is minus 120. We just scroll down there. So the odds are very, very close to 50-50 in this fight. Yet Holloway has this huge trend on his side, which makes it very easy to, at the very least, cap Holloway at 60% in this matchup, which gives you a 5.5% margin over the betting sites. But in reality, Holloway's probability of winning this, based on that very strong trend, is probably so much more greater than 60%. Is probably, you know, 70, 75, maybe even 80% at least. And so no trend is obviously ever going to be 100%. I'm not saying Max Holloway is definitely going to win this weekend. Poirier is obviously a tough matchup for anyone. But when you consider how these two match up stylistically, the stage in their careers they're both at, and how powerful the trend is that retirement talk and the fighter saying they're retiring is usually, you know, a huge red flag with them, there's more than enough reasons to like Holloway in this fight at an implied probability of 54.5%. We'll get into talking about how these two match up in just a moment. But before we do, just want to kind of cap off the other X factors on this one. Obviously, you know, if we finish talking about the retirement thing, then we can kind of put it to bed and move on to other factors. I think the reason why, when fighters start to mention retirement, and certainly when they announce their retirement, either their career falls off a cliff or they go on to lose almost every fight from that point on for the rest of their career. I think the main reason why that happens is because if we look at like just what MMA is, it's probably the most difficult sport to compete in physically and mentally in the world, right? The injuries, the training, the having to starve yourself to make weight, the damage you take, the injuries you take, the pressure, the performance anxiety, the financial pressures, because let's face it, UFC fighters aren't paid the best. There's all these factors that make this such a tough sport. So in order to operate at the very highest level of this sport, I just think you have to be absolutely all in and completely dedicated to it. And if you're not, I think inevitably you're going to start to slip up and fall behind. And no matter how successful you are in the UFC, unless you're like a Ronda Rousey or a Conor McGregor, you're probably going to be worried about your finances. Now, Dustin Poirier would have been, I guess one of the highest earners in the UFC over the last sort of 5 years. He's had some really big fights, particularly the two Conor fights. But he is only 36 years old. And so even if he's made, say, $10 million maybe, even $20 million, that kind of money has got to last him 30, 40 years. And with inflation, $10, $20 million, trust me, is not what it used to be. And so Poirier's got a certain lifestyle to maintain. I'm sure his outgoings are quite big with him, being a professional athlete. He's probably got a nice big house, a few nice cars and stuff. You could burn through a lot of money very quickly, especially when you're not bringing anything in. So naturally, a really smart, ambitious guy like Poirier that cares a lot about his family, over the last few years, is obviously going to be thinking about alternative revenue streams to replace his income from mixed martial arts. And so inevitably, when you start working on other businesses, other investments, other projects, he's not going to be able to put as much into his training, as much into his development, right? And naturally, as a result, he's probably going to start to slip a little, and he's not going to be able to maintain that really high level of performance that got him to the dance. And I think this is one of the main reasons, probably the main reason, why when fighters start to talk about retirement, you suddenly see their career start to fall off a cliff, is because their attention turns to other things. Now, Poirier might be the outlier, he might be the exception to the rule. He might look better than ever on Saturday night. But again, remember, it is far easier for us to make money long term betting on this sport or any other sport when we're trying to push a boulder down a mountain as opposed to up a mountain. We want to be betting with trends on our side. We want to be betting with momentum in our favour. And it's far easier to find situations where we can bet on strong trends at very favourable odds than in situations where we're trying to cherry pick those outliers and those exceptions to the rule. Our winner on Derek Lewis last week was a really good example. Lewis was a big underdog against a guy in Talison Teixeira who had never been outside the first round, had only spent 35 seconds in a UFC fight, and was very inexperienced. We knew that there was a trend that when inexperienced fighters, face a big step up in competition and they go into the second or third round for the first time in their careers, they quite often fall apart because they panic, right? It's virgin territory. They're not experienced at dealing with that. And, that was a trend that played out in our favour. The fight didn't go into the second or third round, but you get my point. We had favourable odds on Lewis and we bet on a very strong trend. We bet against Teixeira's inexperience and we were able to hit a nice underdog winner. This is a different trend we're betting on with Holloway, but it's an equally strong trend that we know, irrespective of who wins this weekend, it doesn't matter whether Poirier wins, it doesn't matter whether Holloway wins, we know if we keep getting our money into situations like this over the long term where we can bet a guy like Holloway at very good odds compared to his realistic chances of winning this in line with the trend, over the long term we're going to do great. Over the long term we're going to make a really good long term profit. We just need to not overthink things, essentially. So the other X factor on this one is obviously that this fight is going to be in Poirier's home state and the crowd are going to be behind him, and Lil Wayne's going to be walking out with him, and the UFC promotional machine is going to be really behind him, and the UFC are really going to want him to win and all that kind of good stuff and get a happy ending. But we don't get that many happy endings in MMA. Obviously, if the fight goes to a decision and it's close, you'd expect the judges to favour Poirier. But I actually think there's a pretty good chance this one won't be close. So if we consider how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, I wouldn't expect there to be any grappling in this fight. It's for the BMF title. Both these guys are pretty on brand. They like to stand and strike. They like to stand and bang. We have seen a bit of grappling from Holloway in recent fights. Notably the Yair Rodriguez fight. He used quite a lot of grappling in that. And we do know that Poirier's takedown defense isn't great. I'd be surprised if Holloway were to use grappling in this fight, but it wouldn't be impossible. And Poirier is very weak off his back. If you go watch his fight against Michael Chandler, you'll see what I mean. If the fight did go to the ground, I would give Holloway quite a big advantage. I know a bunch of people are rushing to my Discord and to the comment section to call me an idiot for saying that. With Poirier's guillotines and submissions and all that good stuff. But I just think at this stage in their careers, Holloway's a far better MMA grappler, and I know that'll be a contrarian opinion, but I just think that's a fact, unfortunately, for some who may not agree. I think Holloway may kind of switch it up, use a bit of grappling. Poirier isn't going to be able to grapple in this fight because he doesn't have the level of offensive wrestling required to take Holloway down. So if anyone were to take anyone down in this fight, it would be Holloway taking Poirier down, but I doubt it's going to come to that. Actually, an X factor that I forgot to mention was obviously referenced in their first fight. So in their first fight, it was very close. It was very competitive. There were a lot of momentum swings back and forth. Poirier ended up winning, and a big issue for Holloway in that fight was that he couldn't match the power or the physicality of Poirier. So if you watch that fight back in the cold light of day, you'll see both guys landing, equal numbers of strikes. It was very close, it was very competitive, but the real difference between the two is that Holloway just couldn't hurt Poirier. He just didn't have the power in his hands to trouble Poirier, whereas when Poirier would land on Holloway, the power and the physicality of Poirier would cause Holloway a lot of trouble. He would inflict damage, he would push him back, and yet it wasn't like Holloway was undersized because both guys were about the same size, but there was a big difference in physicality, and you could see at the time the step up from featherweight to lightweight was just a bit too much for Max. But now obviously Max is older, his body has changed, he's bulked up, he hits harder. He looked physically incredible against Justin Gaethje in that fight at lightweight, and obviously Holloway has made the permanent step up to the lightweight division now and committed his future to the lightweight division to the extent that he's even asked the UFC to remove him from the featherweight rankings, which is pretty serious considering how incredible Holloway is and how he is still probably the second best featherweight in the world, right behind Topuria. But anyway, I just thought I would briefly go over his last matchup because I kind of, or their last matchup, because I kind of got to go through that with the X factors. So we've covered grappling. Now let's get to striking, which is the real meat and potatoes of this matchup and where we would expect this fight to be determined. So I think one big thing that has changed from their last matchup will be, I don't think Poirier's power and physicality will give him as much of an edge this time. Poirier will likely still be more powerful than Holloway, but I think what will change in this fight is that Holloway is really going to be able to hurt Poirier, whereas he wasn't really able to hurt him in their last fight. He just didn't have the power in his hands. He inflicted real damage on Justin Gaethje and landed clean, hard, damaging, impactful shots and just look a lot more physically imposing. So I think that's going to be a big change in this fight because Poirier is a guy that likes to stand in the pocket and exchange and throw down, and he could get away with doing that against Holloway because Holloway didn't really have the power to trouble him. But in this rematch, I think it's going to be a whole different ball game, and there's going to be much more risk for Poirier exchanging with Holloway and standing in the pocket. So I think Holloway is the faster, more accurate boxer. Poirier has more raw power, but but I think Holloway is more, like I say, speed, accuracy, and probably the more technical boxer out of the two as well. One thing we've seen Holloway struggle with over the years is leg kicks, and we know Dustin Poirier has great leg kicks. He were able to use leg kicks to cause Conor McGregor big problems. So leg kicks are definitely going to be a very nice weapon that Poirier can use in this fight against Holloway, because Holloway does stand heavy on the lead leg. He is susceptible to those leg kicks. But I just see Holloway as being too much for Poirier this time. I think he's going to have more volume. He's going to have the speed advantage. He's going to hit harder. And while the first couple rounds might be quite competitive, I think as we get into that third, fourth, and fifth round, when we really know Holloway starts to ramp it up, the longer the fight goes, the better Holloway gets. And when Holloway starts to find his range, he tends to be pretty devastating. I think once we get to that third, fourth, fifth round, I think you'll start to see Holloway pull away from Poirier and potentially cause him some big problems. So I am quietly confident Max gets the job done this weekend, and I would be I'm not going to say I would necessarily be surprised if Poirier would win, but it would definitely defy a very strong trend I've observed over the last 15 years, and certainly defy my expectations for how fights like this usually go. You know, I would love to see Dustin win this weekend. I love a happy ending. We all love a good movie. And, you know, Poirier's been one of my favourite fighters over the years. He seems like a great guy. But storylines like this in the UFC don't usually have a happy ending. That's all I will say. Hope I'm wrong. We'll see. We will see. So in terms of the over-under on this one, we can see that the over-under is in the even money odds range, with the odds leaning towards this fight going to a decision at slight favourite odds. For me personally, I'm not going to bet the over-under on this one, but if I were to bet the over-under, I would let the odds do the work for me, and I would just take fight not to go to a decision. I would just take fight ends inside the distance at slight dog odds, just purely based on the fact that we know both these guys are going to go toe-to-toe. We know they're both going to go to war. We know they don't like to take a backward step. We know they're both dangerous on the feet. And when you have two guys like that, even though they're very tough and very durable and very well-rounded, 25 minutes is a long time for these two guys to stand in front of one another and bang. And just on that basis alone, and the fact that fight ends inside the distance has better odds, I would just let the odds do the work for me, and I would take that, even though I don't feel too strongly either way about it. And in terms of the prop bets on this one, God, I dislike these odds comparison sites. They are messy in the way they display data. I'm looking forward to launching my own odds comparison tool sometime in the next month or two, which will be far better than anything else that exists. But anyway, for now we will make do with this absolute piece of shit. Alright, so terms of most likely outcomes for the props, what's Holloway by knockout or TKO now? The odds aren't that great. I do think Holloway by knockout or TKO is the most likely outcome. Poirier's been knocked out a bunch of times in his career, rocked, wobbled, dropped, all that kind of stuff. And he's getting old now. 40 pro fights is a lot of fights, a lot of injuries, a lot of damage. I know Max was knocked out, in his last fight against Poirier, but he was looking pretty sharp before that. And obviously no shame in being KO'd by Poirier. The guy is lethal, to put it mildly. So yeah, man, it's a great fight. I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out, and hopefully Max comes through for us. Now let's get into the next fight between Paulo Costa and Roman Kopylov. So if we take a look at the odds, we can see that Kopylov is the favourite at average odds of about 1.44, which is going to be minus 227 for an implied probability of 69%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent Costa, he's around an average of 3.0, which is going to be plus 200 for an implied probability of 33%. So Costa is 34 years old, 6'1", with a 72-inch reach. And Kopylov is 34 years old, 6 foot tall, with a 75-inch reach. So both guys the same age, pretty much the same size as well. So this is an interesting matchup. When I first saw, this fight was happening this weekend, and I started researching it, my initial feeling before watching any footage or checking the odds was that this was going to be a really good fight for Roman Kopylov, because Costa's a guy that slows down as fights wear on. He can't match the volume of Kopylov, and I just thought this would be one of those fights where Kopylov would kind of just dance around Costa and just pick him off and make it look really easy. Now, that is still the most likely outcome, but I'm far less confident in Kopylov than I thought I would be, which I am guessing is why the odds on Kopylov are starting to improve, because this is probably one of those situations where a bunch of people have bet Kopylov before researching it, just to kind of lock in the value, get that early position before the odds start to move. And now they're kind of researching the fight, potentially regretting their initial bet on Kopylov a bit and starting to hedge out. That's what I'm guessing is happening here. So as you can see from the directional arrows, Costa's odds are declining, Kopylov's odds are improving. Obviously, whenever you're dealing with betting betting on a fighter in this odds range, at an implied probability of close to 70%, if you're going to bet a fighter in that odds range, they have to have virtually no way to lose. And when you start researching this one, it becomes pretty obvious very, very quickly that just isn't the case here. And the Paulo Costa is quite live in this fight, even if Kopylov is still more likely to win. So in terms of how these match up stylistically, this is a fight where Costa has a pretty huge advantage on the ground. So Kopylov is one of these guys that, is a bit of an exception to the rule, because most Russians are very difficult to take down and hold down. But Kopylov is one of these guys that if you do put him on his back, he is at a very, very low level on the ground. And we saw him absolutely melt on the ground against Anthony Hernandez. He's very, very bad there. Saw him struggle on the ground against Albert Duraev as well. Kopylov is one of these guys that isn't the easiest to take down, because he's got decent balance. But if you use a bit of chain wrestling, put him on his back, he'll literally just lie on his back and he has no idea how to get back up to his feet. That's a bit of an issue against someone like Costa, because even though we associate Costa as primarily being a striker, he obviously started life as a grappler back on the Ultimate Fighter Brazil, way back when he had blonde hair and a completely different personality as well. He was just basically an MMA grappler. He didn't really have any striking at all, and then over the years he evolved into a striker. But what that means is Costa does have pretty good offensive wrestling. He's not the best chain wrestler, but the injuries that he has on his double leg takedowns is pretty good. And because he's a big, strong, physically imposing guy, he's got a heavy top game as well. So, Costa's not famous for fighting strategically. Usually Costa only goes to his grappling when he starts to get tired or runs into trouble on the feet. But when we are analysing a matchup like this, we're trying to obviously assess how both guys match up stylistically in all areas, so we can gauge the real probability that both fighters have of winning. And with the risk that Costa could potentially use grappling to cause Kopylov a problem in this fight, it becomes very, very difficult to justify Kopylov at such a high implied probability. So that's just one part of victory that Costa has. Another part of victory that Costa has in this fight is that if you go back and watch almost any of Kopylov's matchups that have gone the distance, by the end of the fight, you'll notice that the guy looks like he's damn near been in a car crash. He takes so much damage. He's just one of these guys that, for whatever reason, does get hit a lot and does take a lot of damage in fights. Now, he's very tough. He does have good footwork. He does have good movement. And he does have good cardio. but he does take a lot of damage. I know I keep saying it, but I can't really think of any other way to dress it up other than the fact that this guy takes a lot of fucking damage. And Costa obviously hits very hard. He's got big knockout power. He's got a really nasty kicking game, really hard body and leg kicks. We saw him have success with those in the Adesanya fight. And so this is one of those matchups where Kopylov will definitely have the volume on his side. He will be able to outpoint Costa, but Costa is very good at getting respect in there and keeping fights visually close, even without matching his opponent's volume. I think the Whittaker fight was a pretty good example of this. If you go back and watch the Whittaker fight, Whittaker did win, he did outpoint Costa, but Costa kept it like reasonably close. It wasn't one of those fights where Whittaker was running away with it. It was one of those fights where you always felt that Costa could just land a big shot or a big combination that could swing momentum back in his favour or steal around. He's very good at hanging in there. He kind of accepts that he's not going to be able to keep up with these high volume strikers, but what he does, he really makes it count, and he does land hard, damaging, impactful shots, and he knows when to crank it up. You know, he knows how to pace himself. He'll take rounds off. You know, he'll finish rounds strong to try and steal them. Costa's an interesting one because he's such a goofy character. He's got this persona online of him being a bit of a you know, like a jester, like a class clown, but actually he's quite intelligent when it comes to fighting, and he understands what he needs to do to win. He knows how to pace himself, and that makes him a tricky challenge, especially for someone like Kopylov, that he's going to kind of just look to bounce around, get into exchanges, fight with his hands down low, and potentially fall for some traps to cost the sets. So this is one of those matchups where, you know, Kopylov should win. He does, you know, he should definitely be the favourite in this fight. There's no doubt about it. I'm not even going to necessarily say the odds are inaccurate on this fight, because I don't think they are. I just think that the odds are probably exactly where they should be. This isn't one of those situations where I would say, you know, this is dog or pass, because I just think, you know, Kopylov is probably going to win this, to be fair. It's just I really don't like his odds at all. I don't think there's any upside in betting his odds. So this one's a real easy pass for me. In terms of the over-under on this fight, we can see that the odds on the fight to go to a decision are pretty steep. I would agree with that. I don't think it's that likely it ends inside the distance, mainly because of how they match up stylistically. So Costa is obviously, you know, quite a powerful guy, but Kopylov's a tough Russian that isn't easy to finish. We've already said, you know, his fights to go to a decision, he tends to take so much damage in them. That's because he's so fucking damn tough. He's just very difficult to finish. And Kopylov's not really a finisher. He's more of a volume striker. So if you look at Kopylov's record, even though a lot of his fights have ended inside the distance, styles make fights. And when you look at Costa's record, we can see that his last 4 have gone to a decision. So Costa's not the biggest finisher, mainly because, you know, he's not as aggressive as he used to be. He paces himself much better. He doesn't really have the killer instinct like he used to have. And, you know, Kopylov's a tough fucker. So very likely this fight goes to a decision. In terms of the most likely outcome, I think the most likely outcome for the props would be Kopylov by decision. And can we find that? Yeah, not you know, even many dreadful odds. So yeah, I wouldn't bother with that. So yeah, if you do really want to bet this fight, I would probably say just take Kopylov, but the odds are really, really bad, and there's no value there. And to be honest with you, it's a pretty bad bet. But at the end of the day, gambling's a form of entertainment. If you want to bet every fight to make watching this event more interesting, Kopylov's probably a guy, but the odds very, very bad. So now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Patricio Pitbull versus Dan Ige. So if we take a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Ige is the favourite at average odds of about 1.47, which is going to be minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Pitbull, he's going to be around an average of, we will say, 2.75, which is going to be plus 175 for an implied probability of 36%. So Ige, 33 years old, 5'7" with a 71-inch reach. Pitbull, 38 years old, 5'6" with a 65.5-inch reach. So a couple very nice trends in Ige's favour here. He's 5 years younger than Pitbull, which is a pretty big deal because 38 years old is very, very, very old for a featherweight. We know that the lighter weight classes are all about speed, reflexes, and athleticism, which are some of the first things that go as you start to get older. So Pitbull, ancient, to be honest with you, for a featherweight. And Ige at 33 years old, I mean, he's not young for a featherweight, but the difference between 38 and 33 at this stage in their careers in the featherweight division, it's quite significant. So that is a strong trend in Ige's favour. The younger fighter wins around about, there's a 5-year age gap in a fight, so around about 65% of the time when there's a 5-year age gap in a fight. However, obviously stats are only as useful as they are interpreted, and it's not very often that 38-year-olds beat 33-year-olds. So obviously that age statistic is an average of when 30-year-olds fight 25-year-olds or 35-year-olds fight 30-year-olds, and that's going to dilute the strength of the stat that we would likely get if we just knew how often 38-year-olds beat 33-year-olds. It's not going to be anywhere near 65%, I would imagine. I would imagine the stat for younger fighters beating older fighters would be far higher than 65%. We've also got a very nice reach advantage in Ige's favour, just around about 5 inches. So very, very nice 5.5 inch reach advantage for Ige, which is pretty big because he hits like a truck and has true legit knockout power in his hands. So this is a very good fight for Dan Ige. I've never rated Pitbull, to be honest with you. You know, even when he was doing his thing as a Bellator champion, I always thought he was very passive and really didn't do very much and struggled to put his stamp on rounds a lot of the time. And I felt he was able to retain the Bellator championship for such a long time just because didn't really have a particularly high level of competition to face in Bellator. So I'm not surprised to see him look pretty bad when he comes to the UFC and faces Jair Rodriguez. And this is another tough fight for him this weekend. Having said that, we do know that Ige is one of these guys that does have pretty bad takedown defense, and he is pretty weak off his back. It's a strange one with Ige because you can see him in the gi here, trained with Khabib for a long time at American Kickboxing Academy. Ige has the ability to work his way back up to his feet if he wants to, but Ige's one of these guys that just takes too long to work through grappling positions, which can sometimes get him in trouble. So we saw Pitbull try to use a grappling heavy game plan in his UFC debut against Jair Rodriguez. It didn't work, but it is a weapon that he can use to try and steal rounds against someone like Ige that is quite easy to take down. So on the ground, I would actually give Pitbull the advantage. Ige's ground game's just not very good. Like I say, he does give up cheap takedowns a lot. Does take a long time to work through bad positions on the ground. So it's possible Pitbull could have a little bit of success grappling in this fight, stealing rounds with takedowns, getting a bit of top control, that kind of thing. But on the feet, I heavily favour Dan Ige. He hits harder, and that's not to take anything away from Pitbull's power. Pitbull does have power. But Ige's also got a lot of power too. He's also got that reach advantage. He's got a very nice leg kicking game. And while technically Pitbull is probably the more technical striker, the problem with Pitbull throughout his career is that he just doesn't throw very much. He's very passive, very tentative, a very low volume striker. So he's quite easy to outpoint. So with Ige being more aggressive, throwing a decent volume of strikes, Ige should just be able to outwork Pitbull on the feet here. So yeah, heavily favour Ige in this matchup. I wouldn't bet him personally because his odds come with quite a steep implied probability of 68%, which means you've got to really cap Ige. You know, you've got to give Ige like a 75% or better chance of winning this to get like a good margin of value, which for me doesn't really make a whole lot of sense considering Pitbull does have true legit knockout power, and you know Ige isn't great on the ground. But having said that, age gap, reach advantage for Ige, the busier striker out of the two. I would expect Ige to get the job done. In terms of the over-under on this one, now if you look at the records of both guys, they are decisionators. You can see on Ige's record, a lot of decisions. If you look on Pitbull's record, a lot of decisions as well. Having said that, like, both these guys do have big knockout power, so I wouldn't personally bet on this fight to go to a decision. This is one of those ones where I would definitely say let the odds do the work for you. We can see the odds are very steep on the fight going to a decision, like very, very, very steep. And so these odds actually do seem pretty generous on fight ends inside the distance, because even though both guys do go to decisions a lot, styles do make fights. And when you've got two guys that hit as hard as these two, I wouldn't be at all surprised to see someone get knocked out. So yeah, it's one of those matchups where let the odds do the work for you. If you really want to bet the over-under on this fight, I would definitely take fight ends inside the distance. Those odds do seem a bit off to me. I think these odds are capped based on the win-loss records of both guys, where they both go to a decision quite often. But whenever you've got two guys this dangerous with this much power, a knockout is always fairly likely. So yeah, those odds are feeling a bit wide. Ige might by knockout or TKO, odds are a bit steep on that for me. Odds are a bit steep on that for me. Ige by decision is most likely outcome. Odds are steep on that for me as well. So yeah, odds looking a bit dead on that fight, to be fair. So yeah, no decent props there. I would give that a miss. So now let's get into the next fight between Kevin Holland and Daniel Rodriguez. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we can see that Holland is the favourite at average odds of about 1.21, which is going to be minus 476 for an implied probability of 83%. And if we take a look at the odds on Rodriguez, he is around an average of, it's quite a big odd spread. We will say, wow, it's actually a huge odd spread. So we'll just say 4.80, which is going to be plus 380 for an implied probability of 21%. So Holland is 32 years old, 6'3", with an 81-inch reach. And Rodriguez is 38 years old, 6'1", with a 74-inch reach. So we can see a real nice 7-inch reach advantage for Holland. And we can also see he is 6 years younger than Rodriguez as well. So big age gap, big reach advantage, two powerful trends in Holland's favour. And we know that it's not very often that 38-year-old fighters beat guys in their prime at 32 years old. Obviously, age statistics are just there to represent, you know, younger fighters being younger, healthier, more likely to improve. Older fighters more likely to be troubled by, you know, long-term chronic injuries, maybe lacking in motivation, health issues, and decline in athletic performance. And we've definitely seen that reflected in both of these two, where Rodriguez has definitely declined over the last few years, and Kevin Holland seems to be getting better and better. One of the biggest issues with Holland throughout his career is he's been very inconsistent and had bad fight IQ, but even seems to be improving in those areas, which is really encouraging, because if Holland gets his head in the game, he's very, very good. So don't want to spend too much time on this one, because, you know, it's a very easy fight for Kevin Holland. He is better than Daniel Rodriguez everywhere. You know, he's tough, he's durable, he's got great cardio. This is probably one of the very few situations where Holland has also got an advantage over Rodriguez on the ground. It's not very often we can say that about Holland, because the ground is obviously where he's quite weak, but so is Rodriguez. So that's an area where Holland is better than Rodriguez. And we know that Holland moves well on the feet, uses his length well, you know, has big power in his hands, nice rangy kicks. And we know Rodriguez is a bit of a one-dimensional boxer. Rodriguez also doesn't have too much power in his hands. He's got the odd knockout here and there, but for the most part, he's a volume striker. So this is a very easy fight for Kevin Holland. I would be very surprised if he were to lose this. It's difficult to trust inconsistent fighters at steep favourite odds such as this, but I would be truly amazed if Holland were to lose. So I am tempted to throw him into a parlay with Zellhuber this weekend, and I'll explain the reasons why when we get into the Zellhuber fight. But yeah, I'd be very, very surprised if Holland were to lose this. So in terms of the props, even though if you look at Rodriguez's record, you know, he frequently goes deep in fights, I wouldn't be surprised if Holland were to knock him out here. Holland can be very aggressive in some fights, can start pretty fast, and Rodriguez just can't take a shot like he used to. He's not as durable as he used to be. So we can see the odds are pretty steep on fight, ends inside the distance. I think with how big the skill gap is between the two and how much Rodriguez is declining, it would be very difficult for Rodriguez to go, you know, 3 hard rounds with Holland. So this fight most likely ends inside the distance. And in terms of the most likely outcomes for the props, the only one I would consider would be Holland by knockout or TKO. I mean, ideally, I'd love to go with Holland inside the distance to cover the submission, because obviously Rodriguez is a very low level on the ground. You know, Holland does have some wins by submission, and we know maybe if Holland hurts Rodriguez on the feet, maybe he jumps on a choke on the ground. But I would imagine the odds on Holland to win inside the distance are very steep. Yes, they are. So that's the most likely outcome, but the fight is a bit dead when it comes to props. So when it comes to betting that fight. So let's move on to the next. So now let's break down the fight between Daniel Zellhuber and Michael Johnson. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Zellhuber is the favourite at average odds of about 1.17, which is going to be minus 588 for an implied probability of 85%. And if we take a look at the odds on Johnson, he is around about an average of, say, again, massive odds spread on these big underdogs. We'll say 5.25, which is going to be plus 425 for an implied probability of 19%. So Zellhuber, 26 years old, 6'1" with a 77-inch reach, and Johnson, 39 years old, 5'10" with a 73.5-inch reach. So we've spoken so much on this main card about age gaps and age differences and the stages of careers the fighters are in. We spoke about it in the main event, and we spoke about it in these two fights as well, and we've got to talk about it again here, because Zellhuber is, let me get my fucking calculator out for this one, 13 years younger than Michael Johnson. So Johnson, 39 years old, Zellhuber, 26 years old, and we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there is a 13-year age gap in a fight. It's not very often the 39-year-olds beat 26-year-olds. This is a young man's sport, and on top of that, this is one of the lighter weight classes, the lightweight division, where, you know, 39 years old is very, very old for this division. On top of that, Zellhuber has a very nice 7-inch reach, which means he has a 4-inch reach advantage over Michael Johnson, and he knows how to use it. Zellhuber does fight long. So I'm a big fan of Daniel Zellhuber. I think he's excellent. I think he is insanely good for 26 years old, and I wouldn't be at all surprised to see him enter the title picture at lightweight in the future, considering, you know, he's got another 5 or 6 years improving in him before he hits his prime in his early 30s. So this guy is very, very good. Great cardio, tough as nails, great chin, strong heart, strong will to win, decent MMA grappling, like I say, cardio for days, technical striking. For 26 years old, he's excellent, and he's got all the attributes required to be extremely good in this sport. Very, very high on him. He lost his last fight against Esteban Ribovic, but it was one of those performances where I thought a fighter looked utterly fantastic in defeat. For his age, I was really, really surprised by his toughness, his durability, and how there was just no quitting him in that third round where he was very badly hurt and took a lot of damage. So high hopes for Zellhuber, and I think he wins very easily this weekend. At this stage in their careers, he is better than Johnson everywhere. Johnson probably has more raw power. Johnson's always had dynamite in his hands, but Zellhuber proved in his last fight that he's very tough, very durable, the kind of guy that you have to practically kill in order to finish. So I just think Zellhuber's better than Johnson everywhere. I think it really is as simple as that. So this is one of those fights where Zellhuber can pretty much do whatever he wants. He's got a big advantage over Johnson on the ground, and he should be able to outpoint him and outwork him on the feet. Should win very easily. And I'm very tempted to throw him into a parlay with someone like Kevin Holland or one of the other big favourites on this card. So in terms of the over-under on this one, obviously Zellhuber's more of a volume striker. So you can see he goes to a decision. Goes to a decision a lot. And if you look at Johnson's record, even though he does have big KO power, he quite often goes to decisions as well. A bit of a mixed bag for Johnson. This is one of those situations where I do think it's more likely to go to a decision, just because both guys are very technical strikers. I don't think Johnson's going to be able to knock Zellhuber out. He's too tough, he's too durable. Zellhuber's not the most dangerous on the feet. Having said that, he is very aggressive. He probably will be coming out Saturday night, opening up that main card and looking to make a name for himself and make a statement. And it's probably not going to take much to KO, a 39-year-old Michael Johnson who's had over 40 pro fights. Obviously, young man's game, and Johnson's just not going to be able to take a shot like he used to be able to. It's an inevitability. So in terms of the over-under on this one, it probably is more likely to end inside the distance, I guess, but then you're probably better off just betting Zellhuber by knockout for better odds, because it's very unlikely that Johnson would finish Zellhuber. The odds are terrible on that. So yeah, odds on the props and over-under looking a bit dead on this one.